Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Spring Web Research Seminar series on fairness and meritocracy at work. I'm Iris Bonnet. I'm on the faculty here at Harvard Kennedy School and serve as co-director of the Women in Public Policy program. Today, we are incredibly pleased to welcome Professor Alan Benson, who will be presenting on potential and the gender promotion gap. Alan is an associate professor at the University of Minnesota Carlson School of Management, where he teaches on economics and decision making for management. His research focuses on HR-related topics like hiring, promotion, performance evaluations, and compensation. Professor Benson will present for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions from the audience. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A function, and I will read it aloud. Professor Benson welcomes questions during his talk, so if you have a particular question of clarification, please feel free to type it whenever you are ready. And with that, Alan, we're so happy to have you here with us today. We look forward to your talk.
Great. Thank you so much, Eris, and thank you all for being here. I'm really delighted to be sharing this project that we actually just published last month in the AER. And so I'm really glad that, at least like in the economics profession, we're getting the word out about some of the research when it comes to assessing particularly women's potential and how that could be translating into the gap in terms of careers and promotion and advancement. A little bit of background even on this paper. This really came out of an earlier paper that my same co-author team and I did for the QJE in 2019, where we tackled this question of like who do firms promote? And so when firms make promotion decisions, they have to choose whether they're going to promote based on their past performance. So maybe the best salesperson, for instance, or whether they try to promote based on future potential. So whether someone would be a good leader. And this is a conundrum because for firms, when jobs are very dissimilar from each other, firms can't simultaneously optimize on the both. And so they would have to weigh past performance at the expense of other observable characteristics like potential. And so colloquially, this is known as the Peter Principle. Maybe if the best salesperson doesn't make the best sales manager, or the best academic doesn't necessarily make the best dean or university president, you have to kind of weigh whether you emphasize their performance in the prior role or versus markers of whether they'll be a good manager. So what does this have to do with women? Well, I think when we were presenting this to practitioners, a very common refrain that we got was, well, in our organization, we decouple ratings of performance versus potential. And so maybe if you're a large organization, you might have seen something like Ninebox, or maybe your organization uses Ninebox, but it is a talent assessment and a succession planning tool where managers are asked to rate their subordinates both on their dimensions of their performance in their job, that would be like the columns, and also on their potential. And so the idea here would be, well, let's say that you are fantastic in your role. Look at all the people who are doing your job. You're the number one person, but you maybe aren't necessarily the best leader. And in that case, we can put you in the high professional category, and we can have implications like, we'll give you bonuses. We will give you maybe a different track, individual contributor track to go up, but we're not going to make you lead other people. Alternatively, somebody who's like a rough diamond, someone who's high potential, but not performing well in their current role, maybe we need to give them the kind of developmental opportunities so that we can turn them into the future star, turn them into a consistent star, advance them up the organization. Now, when we are presenting this, again, Ninebox came up all the time, or maybe there are other tools. Let's say that in our organization, we have a five item scale for performance, 5-item scale on potential. And so we somehow decouple these two measures. On the other hand, whenever we brought up Ninebox, people said they hated Ninebox. And one of the common refrains as to why people hate Ninebox is the perception that it's highly biased. And so, you could go online, you could see what Ninebox looks like, and you'll see lots of articles saying, here's Ninebox, here's how you implement it. It's free, it's open, anyone can use it. It's integrated in all the HR information systems. But on the other hand, like maybe we don't like it because we think it's really subjective. And so, and then particularly the kind of the most common refrain is that there could be the sense that like women in particular would get pigeonholed as being excellent individual contributors, but with low potential. And so maybe by having like maybe 9 box is almost like a Trojan horse that, it looks like kind of like an objective tool, but at the other hand, it's also maybe a way of like quantifying or justifying this idea that, women could be good at their job, but still not be promoted, at least not into the leadership positions. So what we do in this paper is that we show that subjective assessments for workers' potential contribute to lasting gender gaps in promotion and the inefficient allocation of talent across roles. And so we're going to show that in particular using, in the case of a large retailer that is using 9box, supervisors are going to rate subordinates, again, like with low, medium, or high potential, like other companies. They're going to be level setting meetings, sometimes called calibration meetings. These ratings are going to compile up the organization, and they're going to determine things like coaching, developmental opportunities, and promotion, or is commonly referred to, this is a succession planning tool. Like, how are we going to decide who is going to get training opportunities, advancement opportunities, and the type of assignments that might assess whether someone develop people as leaders and also assess whether they'd be ready for the next role. Um, and so as a preview of our results, what we show is that there's gender gaps in promotion and promotion, pay, and potential ratings. I mean, this is something that we generally see across many different organizations, diminishing shares of women in the higher rungs of the organization, which is also a big driver of the overall pay gap in the labor market. Number two, we're going to show gender bias and potential ratings. And in particular, when we say bias, we mean, well, we have the benefit of hindsight. We could say, okay, well, what were people's potential ratings in the past? And did they accurately reflect whether someone performed well in the future? And for a test of bias, you could say, well, the ratings of potential were biased if they underestimated the future performance of women. In particular, we're going to test whether the ratings of women's potential seem systematically underestimated how they actually did in the future in their job. Um, the third thing we're going to do is we're going to offer kind of like two classes of hypotheses. One relates to stereotypes and role congruity, ideas of role congruity, and whether people just think about women as leaders. Another is a strategic concern as well, which is that the organization here, they say that women are more likely to stay, even if they're passed up for promotion. And so if we're strategically trying to decide where we're going to allocate promotion decisions, then the manager who is looking to retain their highest performing subordinates, there is a strategic reason for them to provide lower potential ratings to women under purely for the retention concern. And the fourth thing we're going to do is we're going to benchmark our results against some common policy corrections, for instance, just giving more weight to the potential dimension, and you putting our thumb on the scale, saying that, well, women are outperforming their prior ratings of their potential. Maybe we just say that like a medium potential rating for women counts more than like a medium potential rating for men when it comes to promotion decisions. And so we're going to benchmark what would happen under those counterfactual scenarios, both in terms of efficiency and in equity as well. So a bit about background. So I have to admit, before we started this project and when we were presenting our earlier results, I didn't know anything about 9box. It was relatively new to me. But then people were saying, "Oh, our organization uses this," and I'll give a bit of background of how this came to be. So it actually started in the 1970s through a consulting partnership through General Electric and McKinsey. And the fundamental question they were asking is whether we should whether a business unit was high performing but low potential versus like high potential but low performing. So you might have like the cash cows that you milk in order to invest in the stars. Think about like Google search produces a lot of cash. They can use that cash to reinvest into high potential technology like artificial intelligence. Um, and since the 1970s and 80s, it has quickly adapted to HR problems. Just how business units can be higher low potential and higher low performance right now, today. Likewise, workers might be high performers, but might have low potential, whereas some people might have be high potential, like AI, but just not necessarily well matched for their current job. It also solved the development problem. We need to know where to allocate our leadership training. Solves the succession planning problem. Need to know who could fill a vacant role if someone leaves tomorrow. And also incentive alignment problems. So some companies might give a bonus based on the performance dimension, but then give maybe unvested stock rewards or promotions based on the potential. That way you can actually retain them. When I say this is common, we've since learned, since presenting this, we learned that all three of our universities, Minnesota, uh, Yale, and MIT, have versions of 9box. And so this is at least our version of, we actually have 4box, so maybe less ambitious version of 9box, where people could rate the subordinates on performance and potential. And maybe like a lot of others, when we get this email, we are basically told to, be cognizant that there are gender biases, and so just don't do that. Um, but here's the problem. I think that we have really good evidence already that we should be very suspicious that managers can objectively and fairly rate people's potential. Number one, you may be able to imply that just potential is incredibly subjective. What potential means to me could be very different from what potential means to another. Um, and one way that this manifests is in a very well evidenced stream of literature called role congruity theory. And in role congruity theory, it's relates to this idea that leadership stereotypes are masculine, and leaders and men are both stereotypically more results oriented, assertive, ambitious, and so on. Um, and just a type of evidence that we see for role congruity theory, there are, for instance, like resume audit studies where two candidates will have this exact same background, but then recruiters are asked to evaluate somebody for a promotion or for like a leadership role. And people tend to prefer the male candidate for leadership type roles and rate them as being more likely to succeed as a leader, again, holding everything else constant. Another type of evidence for role congruity theory is in the adjectives people use to describe men versus the adjectives people use to describe women. There's a high degree of concordance between the adjectives that people use to describe men or masculine type traits and how they describe leaders. They describe both men and leaders as agentic, aggressive, ambitious, assertive, authoritative, competent, confident, controlling, and so on. And so this idea that men, if they try to envision a leader, they associate those with more masculine type stereotypes. Um, there's also evidence that men have more access to social networking and other avenues that allow them to schmooze with others. There's evidence that men are more likely to complain if they get like a performance evaluation that they don't like. And then finally, there's retention concerns as well that women might be less likely to quit if they get low ratings or otherwise passed over for promotion. Um, Now, in terms of like 9box itself, there's not a lot of evidence on how of kind of its history, other than what we could find through non-academic channels. Um, but there have been a few studies that suggest that, at least in kind of like selected samples in large corporations, most companies use them at least in some function. And to give a bit of a background, like these 9box succession planning tools and other subjective ratings of potential really emerged kind of notwithstanding all of the evidence that we had that these are quite vulnerable to biases and heuristics. Um, okay, so a little bit about our setting. So we're going to use data from a large US retail firm. They employed over 1 million workers, mostly entry level over these 6 years. We are going to focus on almost 30,000 core salaried managers and professional track workers employed in corporate headquarters across over 4,000 establishments. So one of the notable things about our setting is that actually most people are already managing people. And so if you think about like maybe one of the big steps that someone has is to go from someone who's not managing people to managing people, well, actually we're already focusing on a subset who are, already have like the ability to prove themselves at least leading others. Um, so so in promotions in these settings, typical career ladder and the operational side might be department, well, you could start from like wage and hourly positions, but then the first like kind of leadership positions that would be subject to 9 box would be the department managers, then to store managers, and to district managers and regional presidents. And within those levels, there's also smaller promotions as well. So you might go from a trainee to regular to senior or so on. You could go to a larger store, for instance. And we're going to define a promotion as a change in job title associated with an increase in average compensation or personal increase of salary of more than 5%. So our firm is pretty typical in how our firm implements 9 box. Managers provide the initial ratings. Managers can adjust the ratings in successive calibration meetings. The HR is going to lock in the ratings and eventually use those for development opportunities and succession planning. Um, I think for like kind of the org economists in the meeting, we think about this as kind of being a trade-off between the manager who's directly managing somebody has this local information, but might be subject to bias. On the other hand, you could have, maybe the senior leadership of the organization, which might be able to leverage more data, but wouldn't necessarily have like the exact local information or an observation that the manager kind of just has in their head based on what they see of this person's behaviors. Um, and so in our organizations, managers receive no formal training regarding how to assign ratings. They're provided the definition of the axes. Performance is supposed to be backward looking, potential is supposed to be forward looking, and they have the labels in the 9 boxes. In our setting, just like, again, what we think of as most settings, is that the manager's initial ratings are highly influential on the final ratings. There's not a lot of adjustments that go in the calibration meetings. One of the main purposes of the calibration meetings is really more just to make sure that you don't have like one manager who is rating everybody really low, but maybe their unit's performance is very good, or maybe one manager who's rating everybody very high, even though their whole unit's performance is very poor. So just to provide some sense of internal consistency rather than to really check bias per se. This is the shares of women up the organizational hierarchy. So and this is also very similar to what you'd see in like the census data, like the current population survey, diminishing shares of women up the higher jobs, and also diminishing shares of women up the earnings deciles as well. These are summary statistics. So in our organization, women are about 41% of all managerial, or sorry, of all workers. Again, we're going to be talking about our findings relative to percents. And so annual promotion rates of this organization are about 12% per year. Average performance ratings a little over 2, average potential ratings somewhere between 1 or 2. When you're promoted, you get typically your potential gets reset down to 1 because haven't demonstrated your potential yet. So that's why it's kind of always coming back down. A lot of our story can be told in the correlation matrix. So these are some of the variables we're looking at: female promotion, salaries, performance ratings, potential ratings. So women have lower promotion rates on average. It's negatively correlated with promotion rates, also negatively correlated with salaries. A lot of this negative relationship is because women are in lower level positions, which is also a product of lower promotion rates. On the other hand, women actually have higher performance ratings and they have lower potential ratings. And so these have opposite signs of each other, which maybe would lead to some alarm bells to begin with, but is also somewhat reflective of this reality that women are actually, on average, if anything, outperforming men within the same job, even on objective metrics as well. So things like your department sales or your store sales versus their targets, women tend to stay longer in those roles and also tend to do better on those objective metrics. So in terms of the gap,
Alan,
there's,
can I
yeah,
ask you a quick question that came
please,
in the
yes.
chat just because you just mentioned age?
Mhm.
Will you be able to talk to age in the regression analysis, or is there an interaction between age and gender?
Yeah, so there is, so we're going to show like some gap over the life over different ages. So we're going to be doing this regression across the supported different ages, and so we can see what that result looks like. I have to confess, I'm not 100% sure it's in this talk, but it is definitely in the paper, where
Mm-hmm.
we show what is the gap at like say childbearing ages, for instance. So yeah, it's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
There was a second question I'm going to quickly ask. Again, you haven't shown us any regressions yet, but then I don't have to interrupt you then. Is there any information about entry level of female worker education level? Will you be controlling for educational background, or is that not the information you have?
Unfortunately, we don't have educational background.
Okay.
Not something that something we wish we could have had. Yeah.
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 Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, my pleasure. Yeah. Um, so in terms of the gap, I'm going to document the promotion gap, the ratings gap, and then how much of the promotion gap is due to the ratings gap. So overall in this organization, again, think about the annual rate of promotion is about 12% per year. Women have 1.6% lower promotion rates. And so, something like a 10% lower likelihood of being promoted, a little more than 10%. Um, and again, think that if to reach the upper echelons of an organization, you need to be promoted several times. And so kind of the joint probability of reaching the higher upper echelon of the organization, that's kind of like what's like how you get the results that we see where there's relatively few women at the very top of the organization. Um, when you control for performance, the gap actually increases. And again, you have to remember that like women on average have higher performance ratings than men on average. And so if you control for performance, the gap is even larger. Um, Now for tenure, it actually goes down, and that's because women have longer tenure within their job. And this is kind of intuitive as well, because you might think, okay, well, like women are being stuck in their jobs, perhaps for longer without being promoted. Um, for the overall pay gap, women are earning about 12.5% less than men. This is just the estimated value here. And now if you control for your job level, so if you control for the job level in the year, that gap decreases to about 4%. And the intuition here is that, we can actually know this from other settings as well. Most of the gender pay gap isn't so much because people are paid differently for doing the same job. It's because people are assigned to different jobs. There are just simply more men who become CEOs, for instance, or men who become neurosurgeons, women who become nurses instead. And so a lot of that is due to assignment, and this is the same case in our organization. Now, in terms of descriptors for the nine box ratings, on the left panel, we have the distribution of nine box ratings for men. And so there's a concentration of men who are getting kind of median performance and the one on potential. Now, on the right-hand panel, we show the relative shares of women who are in each of these boxes. So once again, women are more likely to get the highest performance ratings, but they are far less likely to get the highest potential ratings. And so you might think, okay, what is the implications of these lower potential ratings on the promotion rates? So if you look at the nine boxes as a whole, again, you see like more women are being pigeonholed or are being allocated these ratings where they're being rated as being high performance but low potential. Um, but the problem is that for people who find themselves in that category, the promotion rates for both men and for women who are in that lower right-hand quadrant or I guess, box are very low. The way that you get promoted in this organization is largely through getting the higher potential ratings. People with low potential ratings, even if they're high performers, don't get are rarely promoted. Um, so you might ask, like,
And can I
yeah,
interrupt you for just a second?
yeah, please.
I just find this an interesting table because if the company only looked at this table,
Hmm.
they'd think we don't have a problem.
Fantastic point. And
Right? I mean,
and
they just
yeah,
have to combine your two tables. The previous
yeah,
one, the
yeah,
likelihood of being in
yeah,
box X, right, versus
exactly,
box
yeah,
Y,
yeah.
and then they can see that there's something going on.
That is a fantastic insight because that is exactly what happened. They didn't think that they had an issue with bias in promotions because they say, look, we can explain differences in men's and women's promotion rates based on their potential ratings. Now, this isn't a reason why you might be suspicious, especially like if you're doing like any maybe sort of like benchmarking for a company, or even if you're doing trying to like figure out what's going on with promotion rates. This suggests that you should not control, like you shouldn't just control for potential and say that like, there's, and then see if there's a female gap in promotion rates. You should say like, who is getting the lower potential ratings and can we actually justify the lower potential ratings? And so we're going to go that step further into saying that, well, yeah, women are getting low potential ratings, and we don't see any reason why, again, looking at what their future performance actually was, why they should be getting those lower ratings. Yeah, I think it's exactly right. You can't just control for potential and say there's no gap, right? The story is in who's getting the potential ratings. And I think that a lot of places people might make this mistake as well. Um, So another question is you might say, okay, well, is this really just like a few biased managers? That's emphatically not the case. If you look at all the bosses who are rating managers on their performance potential, and you saw what is the average rating of their female subordinates, what is the average rating of their male subordinates, you would see almost a distribution that's kind of around zero, but it's actually like slightly offset, meaning that most managers, on average, managers have like a slight tendency to rate women as being lower potential. But for any one manager, because they only have a few subordinates, like they can't really see the forest of the trees. They don't typically these iron box ratings aren't public. You only know what you rated. You only know what you rated other people. And so, like, you don't really see the big picture that women are getting lower potential ratings than men unless you are looking at the organization as a whole, unless you have that kind of data access. Um, then we ask how much of this gap is being explained by the potential rating. And so one way to think about this is what happens when we control for potential rating. Well, this gap shrinks a lot after this is a regression where we're controlling for the potential rating. And one thing you'll notice is that in the blue here, potential rating it means that if you're rated as being high potential, you have a 20% greater probability rather than a 10% probability of a 30% probability of being promoted in the next year. So it's a very strong predictor. I mean, potential is meant to determine who gets promoted. And also the female coefficient drops a lot. That is, the direct effect of being female, net of controlling for potential, is actually becomes much smaller. So one thing we do is we do what's called a Oaxaca blind Kitagawa decomposition. And so this is just to say, look, men's promotion rate is 12.6%, women's promotion rate is 10.9%. So we have a 1.6% promotion rate cap. How much of it is due to your performance rating and how much is due to your potential rating? So again, because women have higher performance ratings on average, it's actually negative, meaning that because women are getting higher performance ratings, you have to explain more of the variation in who's getting promoted through other channels. And so you see a big effect for the potential rating. That means so about a 1% of the gap in the promotion rates between men and women is explained because women are getting lower potential ratings. And very little of the share is being explained because women are being rewarded more for having higher potential. And so it looks like, it's not that women are being um, there's not much of a gap like in even within the boxes. It's not like women are getting rewarded more or less for having higher potential ratings. Really, the big gap in the promotion rates appears to be because women are getting lower potential ratings. So now we're going to test for bias and trying to examine like how this plays out in the organization. So we think, okay, well, if we're going to come up with a test for bias, we have to define what should the potential ratings predict. So the practitioner literature describes the potential ratings as an employee's ability to contribute to the firm in the future. And so it could be growth in the current role. It could also be potential performance if you are promoted. And our organization doesn't define these to the managers doing the ratings. I think that's also pretty common. This question of we're rating someone's potential. Well, potential for what? And so we're going to adopt two interpretations. One is we're going to look at growth within the current role. Second, we're going to look at performance in the promoted role. And so it's possible that women, even though they are performing as well or better than men, in principle, it's possible that in the future their performance wouldn't grow as quickly as men. So this is an example of what the world could look like, that women's performance declines over time or with promotions, men's performance rises over time with promotions. So on average, women and men perform the same, but just men have more potential. Um, so that's not what we find. So here we're going to control for future performance ratings. And we're going to try to predict future performance ratings based on the gender of the person and also based on the prior ratings of their performance and their potential. So one thing you'll notice is that the main thing is that the female coefficients are positive, meaning that women are systematically outperforming their prior ratings of their performance and their potential. Uh, the other thing you'll notice is that the potential ratings are also positively correlated with the future performance ratings. Why does this matter? That matters because it looks like Ninebox, in some sense, is doing its job. Remember, Ninebox was meant to solve an issue that, in principle, the managers could know something about whether someone will be a good worker in the future, whether their performance is going to grow more quickly or whether they would be good for a promoted role. And it suggests that that potential rating actually does provide that information. It's just that the levels being used to compare to rate men and women are just being rated lower. And so you can think that potential ratings are correlated with future performance within sex, both for women and for men. It's just that women are being rated lower. Oh, so here we go. This goes to our previous question, right? So here we're going to plot these same coefficients across the age distribution. And so these are within 5-year increments and where we see the biggest gaps. And so what we see is that the potential ratings in particular for women are particularly large, kind of around, kind of like in your 40s. So you might think of it as like maybe kind of after when you would have a child or when you might have maybe you have a child age children. Um, so in terms of desirable promotion, so we think that well maybe women don't want a promotion that might require relocation, or maybe they don't want a promotion that would involve leading subordinates. So we look at heterogeneity by the type of promotion that they might receive. Um, Basically, we see similar results for in-state promotions versus different state promotions. We see similar results for promotions that would involve large raises. And also, if anything, we see a larger gap or very, very few women being promoted, even when you have maybe a professional track job that doesn't have subordinates to just a higher level individual contributor role that also would not involve subordinates. And so it doesn't look like there's any special um, uh, setting where this is being driven. So another possibility is that this is so it could be driven by stereotypes that women might not be perceived as being leaders, good candidates as being leaders. Another possibility is that is that women are being passed over for promotion and being rated as lower potential out of for strategic reasons. Um, so in our setting, we do find that women are more likely to take leave. So you could say, okay, well, maybe as you know, the firms are saying, well, women is going to take maternity leave and they're not going to want a promotion or something, and so we'll rate them as being lower potential. So what we do is we try to say, okay, well, um, can we predict the potential either based on their prior leaves, and particularly the interaction of women in prior leaves, um, or future leaves. Now, it is the case that women who are going to take a leave in the future or who have taken leave in the past do have lower potential ratings, and they are more likely to take but at the same time, that's not explaining very much of the overall observed gap. And so I think like maybe maternity leave or child like household labor considerations are part of this could be part of the story, but it's just not like it's not like the full story, even perhaps the majority of the story. There's also the possibility that managers are assigning the higher potential ratings to managers or to others who are being viewed as high risk of loss, so a high risk of leaving the firm. And so in our firm, the nine box ratings are generally kept private from the workers, but managers could say electively, like if someone is considered leaving, they can have a meeting where they say, okay, well, I know you're considering another job, but you should stay because I'm going to rate you as high potential, meaning that you have like a career in this organization. Well, even if we can't advance you now, I'll set you on track to get advanced in the future. Um, and so it does look like firms reward risk of loss. So here we look at what are the attrition rates for women. So women do have lower turnover rates at our firm. Also, when manager are asked to rate workers' risk of loss on a low, medium, high scale, it looks like that they do rate women as being lower risk of loss, consistent with the fact that they do have lower attrition rates. Also, again, we say that women have lower promotion rates as well, and they have lower salaries. Now, if we look at the effects of risk of loss in particular, it looks like, again, like the higher your risk of loss, the more likely you are to actually turn over. So it looks like managers are actually wise as to whether their subordinates are likely to turn over. Um, but we again and that explains some of the gap as well. So it looks like organ firms are allocating high risk of loss ratings to men, which is accurate, and then they also are rating them as being higher potential in order to potentially in order to retain them. And we see that for both the full sample and for under 35 as well. And so we've shown that men are being rated as higher risk of loss, and higher risk of loss leads to higher potential ratings. Um, and so we might ask, are managers trying to avoid attrition among men? And so here is a figure where we present the attrition rates for men and for women who are passive for promotion. So here, as we look at all workers, the thing that really leaps out is that passive or men who are passive for promotion, have a higher risk of leaving than any other category. And that's especially true when you restrict a sample to high performers, those who are rated a 3 out of 3 on their performance dimension. High performing men who are passive for promotion are much more likely to leave than high performing women who are passive for promotion and other women as well. And so this suggests kind of a strategic reason why you don't want to pass over men, in particular high performing men, uh, because you could risk attrition from your peers as well, from other subordinates as well. So then we ask, like, are there potential
Alan, can I
policy
add?
concerns?
Can I quickly
Yeah,
add a comment to this? It's more a comment than anyway, a comment of
yeah.
having worked with companies. This is made worse by the fact that companies reward managers who have lower turnover among their
Mm,
high potential or high performers.
yeah.
So companies basically take high performance or high potential ratings as exogenous and
Hmm.
are saying, great job, I'm going to increase your bonus because the high performers stay and the low performers leave.
Yeah.
And what you were explaining to us is it's all endogenous.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's, if I were a manager and I just cared about what you just mentioned about my bonuses, about my talent management appraisals,
Skills.
then I might say, look, this is my lever for doing that. I think that'd be a smart thing to do. Now, purely from that kind of objective function, right? And so, yeah, no, I think one of the issues that I think firms are maybe implicitly incentivizing managers to do this.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we think about like potential policy corrections, and for here, this is like in some sense quite speculative because we're going to set aside legal concerns, we're going to set aside strategic concerns and everything. We're just going to say, if we could rejigger how we weight evaluations and promotion decisions, what would be the consequences on both efficiency, how well the managers that you could actually do, and also equity counterfactuals as well. Um, and so, well, one thing is we could say, okay, well, um, can we just assign managers to female managers? Is that going to reduce bias? Well, what we find is that actually women don't give higher ratings to women. If anything, uh, women appear to be less biased in their ratings, but they assign lower potential ratings to everybody. So doesn't really help women to be assigned to women managers. If women are assigned to men, men give higher potential ratings on average, but they tend to assign them to two other men. And you can see this by the interaction effects offsetting each other. Um, the same appears to be the case um, for assigning them to high performing managers as well. So in terms of trying to fix nine bucks through like counterfactual ways of using nine bucks for allocating promotions, I will skip over our methodology, but here let's just say that we were promoting people entirely based on their potential rating, but then ignoring gender, taking away gender as a predictor. Well, in that case, you would see some convergence, but you would also see some reduction in performance. So if you ignore gender and potential. Now, the reason why you see reduction in performance of managers is because potential, again, is correlated with success as a manager within sex. And so if you throw away the potential ratings entirely, you say, let's get rid of nine box, let's just not rate people's potential anymore, you're still throwing out valuable information that actually predicts whether someone would be a good manager. So you're inviting the bias, but you are throwing out valuable information as well. Suppose that instead you said we're going to add the potential rating of all high performing women. So if someone is getting if a woman is getting a 3 on the performance rating, let's just give them a promotion rate commensurate with getting a +1 on their potential rating. So in that case, you see, if anything, the gender gap reverses, which is you've essentially equalized it. On the other hand, you get a higher counterfactual performance. The intuition here, so why you get higher counterfactual performance, is that women who are rated as high performers but low potential, when we see them get promoted, they actually do pretty well. And so the way we do this is we say, well, we look at, in some settings and some stores, there's high manageable turnover, and so a lot of people get promoted. When we see that, like those managers who are getting high performance, low potential, those women who are getting high performance, low potential, when they're put into those leadership positions, they actually do quite well. And so we think if there's any kind of place to direct our attention in organizations, maybe we should direct those to these maybe women who are being allocated into that as being like workhorses, for instance, the high performance, low potential.
Mm.
Um,
It's super interesting. Alan, can I ask a question about this previous slide? This
yeah,
is really, there's a lot happening in this slide. But
yeah,
I'm just going to first summarize and then ask a question. The summary is that you're saying, some organizations, when they have heard about your work, have said, well,
mhm,
then should we just do away with potential? Which sounds tempting because we find fewer gender gaps or no gender gaps in
yep,
performance evaluations. And then you're
yep,
saying, no, no,
certainly,
potential is predictive of future performance. So
yep,
you don't want to
yep,
throw out potential. But now you're
yeah,
saying because we have a bias in particularly women's potential evaluations, or particularly we don't quite know how it goes, whether we prefer men or penalize women. But in any case, we have a gap.
yes,
we're basically giving women a bonus, which you said maybe legally is challenging these days. But
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
in any case, and that helps us. Now, my question is, this is also crazy. I mean, it's crazy policies solution, but I'm just asking whether you've ever looked at that.
Mhm.
Um, is the predictive value of potential as important for women as it is for men? Do you need it for
Yeah.
both? Is it helpful for both?
Yeah, I think it's a great thought experiment. We look at the rates of return in terms of promotion, but I don't think we've looked at variation and with predictive power.
Yeah.
I think like
I mean,
maybe yeah,
it's a crazy thought, but I'm just one, I don't, it's not possible either. I mean, politically
yeah.
feasible and not even thinking legally, but also just otherwise. It's not feasible. But
Hmm.
one idea is to say, well, then let's focus on potential and performance for men, but only on performance for women,
Yeah.
because potential is so noisy for women, it's just not helpful.
Yeah, and I think like, I think the thought experiment is still valuable because suppose that, for instance, you had some tool, you had a better nine box, you had, maybe AI looks at all of the information on behaviors and outcomes and came up with a less noisy measure of true potential. Then what would happen to promotion rates? I mean, if, for instance, that maybe women are getting lower potential ratings just because they get less developmental opportunities, they can't observe true potential, maybe they give them worse assignments where they don't get a chance to demonstrate their potential. For whatever reason, it's more noisy for women. And if you could take away that noise somehow, can you get better promotion rates just because you've gotten a more precise signal for this group that from whom it used to be quite noisy? So I
Yeah.
think it's I think it's not crazy to think about like things that might be legal and even might be on the horizon, um, that would that would be important to think about if we thought about like, is this just like differences in noise or differences in like ability to forecast potential for different groups, for instance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. But super interesting thought experiments. But I think, a high level, if you're like a policymaker or an organization, I would be concerned that subjective assessments are inviting bias. And there could be strategic or maybe or just natural reasons that people might be biased when it comes to rating people's potential. Um, I think there's some possibility that we think of policy alternatives. One, that Eris mentioned that I think is spot on is, you can't just say, what is the promotion rates controlling for potential? Because I think a lot of the story is that managers are biased in the ratings of potential. And so you have to try to think about ways that you can address the actual assignment of the potential ratings, not bias within the promotion rates for somebody who has the same potential. Um, I think that nine box invites bias fundamentally because it's very subjective. It would be great, I think we need better, more objective measures of potential. Maybe one solution that I think maybe the research has pointed us to is saying I perhaps drop nine boxes, one size fits all approach and say, look for this job, the next job up. We done our job descriptions. We know this requires, knowledge of budgeting, for instance. And, how can we think about alternative ways of specifying the requirements in the next jobs and think about how people can demonstrate readiness for that job in perhaps a more objective way. Um, I think that's kind of like the high level of like, if we're going to replace nine box with something that is still efficient, but achieves those equity goals as well, then we have to think about different, better ways of actually measuring and giving people opportunities to succeed um, and avoiding maybe the temptation of just simply resorting to, subjective ratings of people's potential. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Alan. This was super interesting. Thank you. The downside of a virtual seminar is that you can't see the people clap, but thank you so much. I mean, I have a reflection on your last comment, and while I'm speaking, I'm inviting people to ask more questions. The reflection is your problem, or our problem, it's not your problem, the problem you identify is made worse by the fact that many promotions come with more leadership responsibilities.
Right.
And so it's, and leadership in our minds is associated with men. Right?
Mhm.
And so even if, I mean, I like your idea of saying, we absolutely have to go there. We have to do a better job measuring potential. but some of our indicators of potential are also biased, which are
Hmm.
important indicators. I mean, we do want people, as you just said before, being a faculty member doesn't necessarily make for a good president. You probably need some other pieces of competencies that you don't need as a researcher. And some of them are related to leadership. And now, how do we measure leadership? And so it's a really hard problem. It's a really hard problem. I mean, you have done such a tremendous job identifying potential as the culprit. But I also just want to put it out there that, and maybe invite people, because I know we have practitioners in the audience too, of how did you all deal with this? How do we do a better job measuring potential?
I
Okay,
think
so
when I,
now
yeah,
we've
go
got,
ahead.
you can answer it. We've got lots of questions.
I do think like, even in academia, one thing I appreciate about academia is we do like rotate maybe who is chair, who serves on the committee.
Yeah.
They have term appointments for like associate dean. I think like you know, one thing we can do is we can give people the opportunity to demonstrate their competence. And so I know it's like very challenging for people to take on these roles, but you might not, it is also a way that organizations can reveal like whether somebody likes to do that, whether they're good at it, but you also have to be willing to take chances on people and, provide those kind of like entry level points where they can gracefully dip their toe in the water of leadership and then kind of gracefully not do that if that's not for them.
Mm, yeah. So we have a number of questions asking you about additional variables, which I presume you didn't have, otherwise you would have talked about them. But I do want to spell it out. So one person asks about race
Hmm.
and whether you have looked at that or had any data on that.
Yeah.
Another person asks about the gender composition of the team in which somebody was.
Interesting. Yeah. Um, so one is we do have race, and we have looked at it for race, and we actually didn't find anything. So I mean, I don't know how that conforms to people's priors, but there was like no potential gap, for instance, um, for instance, for Black individuals. Um, And so instead there was, I think there could be issues around hiring or promotion outside of this, but yeah, no gap in like the potential rating in particular. And so sorry, there was
The gender composition of
yeah.
the work team.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it would be a really, I think that's kind of we haven't done that. I think there's a lot of different hypotheses because, you might, for instance, let's say you have like a certain budget of like high potential ratings to give, you might you might anchor your ratings, say, based by like comparing people to like similar others, for instance. And so unfortunately, I can't really speak to that now. For now, I think that's kind of a complicated, it's kind of like analytically not, kind of a complicated question. And we don't want to do it until we like 100% sure we could get it right. And so, yeah, can't really speak to that now.
Mm, yeah, thank you. Then I have one more question related on additional information, and that is parental status.
Yeah, we don't have parental status. We only
Yeah.
have whether they take a leave. Um, And so, maybe some suggestive parts is we could see whether they take a leave in the past or the future, and we think it explains some of that. Same thing for like ages. If you look at kind of like prime years for taking care of children in your 40s, it looks like there's some gap in the potential that's like larger then versus like at other ages. But yeah, it is across ages as well.
Mm. So then here's a very specific question, and that is, I'm going to read it loud. Did you study the effects for when a company has a set percent for how many associates should be in any one box? I presume that's like a curve or something. For example, no more than 30% of the
Yeah.
population in high performance, high potential.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any variation with regard to that because there's one corporate company-wide policy, and we can't give the exact policy for for to pick the name of the company, but but there are guidelines that ensure consistency across the ratings, and those would be enforced in like the calibration meetings. I do think like there's a question of like if those numbers are relaxed, like would you still see like bias, for instance?
Mm.
But that we can't speak to.
Yeah, it's a good question because, I mean, again, it's a good question, but you can't answer it. I totally get it. Having worked with companies because they just have one system. But it's an interesting because companies always worry about that question too. Is a curve a good thing to have or is it not a good thing to have? And I don't know the
Yeah.
answer either.
Yeah. And in this case, they've experimented with some different policies besides 9 box and before 9 box and after 9 box. But it really, I think, comes back to this tension of like, they needed to have a system that serves the same purposes. They don't want ratings inflation. They want to be able to distinguish like truly high potential people as well. But they've run up against the issues of bias that this also creates.
Yep. I'm going to read our last question to you. It's
Yeah.
a big question, an important question, but possibly not one that you can answer. In a male-dominated organization like the military, how can we best reduce gender bias to promote capable female soldiers, given there are very few high-level female commanders and without being seen as tokenism?
Yeah. I really don't know. I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's a really high level question. Um, I just imagine that, I think this is why we would need, this is retail. This is a case where there's 41% women. But we still see this here. I imagine places like a military, very hierarchical, very different gender ratios, just much deeper issues. But yeah, that's something that I feel like I could speak to with a lot of confidence.
Yeah. So I said this is the final question, but I'm just going to
Mhm.
respond to the last question, and but you can add in too. But it's beyond your paper, but it's an interesting question. Are there any nudges or primes that could be introduced
Yeah.
before managers make those types of calls? I don't know. We have very much evidence on that, but it is a good question. I mean, we tried a little bit something with raising awareness
Yeah.
of these biases just before people go into this was with a law firm into
Mhm.
their annual performance appraisal meetings. But this was a consulting project, so not research. So I don't know whether it worked or not, but I think the idea is a good one. We should experiment more with, could we do something just beforehand that might help these
Yeah.
managers make more accurate choices? But I don't know,
Yeah.
Alan, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so we looked at the managers who was revealed that their past ratings of potential were biased, that they were lower for women, and that these people outperformed their past ratings of their potential, but we didn't see any movement or we didn't see any updates. So I
Mm.
think unfortunately, with regard to a lot of the things that we tried and that we checked, it didn't look like there was any silver bullet. And I do think like maybe that is kind of part of the story that like a lot of the obvious solutions you might think of, like assignment to like female managers or higher performing managers or giving people an information type of a treatment. We just haven't found a lot of reasons to be optimistic about those. I think if we're going
But
to,
Alan, I
yeah,
think, sorry, please.
I think if we're going to look at the like maybe the broader like behavioral literature, you should have like better anchored scales, which inherently means getting away from like 9 boxes use of a one size fits all approach of where everybody is, left to their own devices to interpret what potential means.
But Alan, I think your findings that you just shared, I didn't know about those, also accords with the literature generally suggesting that just raising awareness won't be enough.
Yeah,
Right? But that we really have to give people the tools, and we don't quite know what those tools would look like. You said, you have some ideas of more criteria, better criteria, more precise measurement, etc. But yeah, I'm not totally shocked that just raising awareness is not going to be enough because they
yeah,
don't know how to do better, even if they wanted to.
yeah. When someone figures that out, you and I will be here to help disseminate that, right?
Okay, excellent. That's a great ending. Well, Alan, this was an inspiring talk. Thank you so much for this important work and congratulations on having it published in one of our very, very best journals.